Good afternoon. This is David Roth, the CRO of America Enterprise Business here at Trend Micro. Really excited to be speaking with Jeff Pollard today, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. So Jeff, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Really excited to talk to you on this topic of AI hype versus reality. I think as we've kind of seen, there's been a fair amount of ambiguity around the value of AI that it can bring into security and security organizations. And we'd like to see if we can discuss a bit the expectations of not just where the earlier on AI buzz had started, but how it's kind of building to where it is now, and like areas of, again, where the hype becomes, where can we find not only reality but practicality or usefulness.
Yeah, I think as AI sort of kicked off, and really we're talking about sort of generative AI, because that's really when the buzz started building. We've had AI and ML within security for a long time now, often really kind of focused on detection, right? That's really kind of where we built a lot of those capabilities. And when generative AI really kind of appeared on the scene, that's when suddenly, a lot of folks kind of started to believe that we were going to have nothing but autonomous security operations center, and you'd sort of have T900s walking through your SOC, and they were going after malware like John Connor, right? And that's definitely the hype, right? It became the sort of term du jour at RSA last year and this year, Black Hat last year and this year. There was a ton of emphasis on it. And to be clear, there are some real use cases where AI can benefit detection and response practitioners, for example. There are some real scenarios where it can even help out folks that are charged with, developing secure applications and things like that. But overall, what we've got is a lot of promises about things like efficiency, productivity, removal of human beings that, one, aren't materializing at all, and two, may not be good even if they do, because it may not lead to the exact same outcomes that we were expecting. These systems are sort of not effective enough at this point to completely remove the human out of the loop in most scenarios. I hesitate to say that we've reached peak AI hype. I don't know if we're quite there yet. If we're not, though, we have to be close to it, or I think we're all going to have a terrible time in the industry in the future, because there are so many kind of false promises or expectations being laid out that just aren't being met right now by the average kind of AI tool within the cybersecurity industry.
Yeah, totally seeing the same thing across the CISOs that I spend a lot of my time with, and it's interesting because obviously skill shortage is still a huge burden and challenge across the majority of enterprises. So I think you find a number of teams, no matter how big or global they might be, that it's still the notion of feeling overwhelmed and or understaffed. So helping folks be the best they can be is definitely what folks are looking for, and I think not necessarily looking for the promise of Skynet, of how the whole thing's going to self-automate without a human being. By the way, it's interesting too. I once met with the head of the MIT algorithms lab, and his comment about the worst case scenario of algorithms in the history of algorithms is when you take humans out of the picture. So yeah. I think generative AI is no different, and the notion of leveraging the power of it, but we're still ensuring that it factors the human in, not how to factor the human out. So
yeah. Agreed. And something I'll add on to that too, in reference to the skill shortage that I think is really important is, AI doesn't solve the skill shortage. It creates the need for a new set of skills. Yep. And that's one of the things that a lot of enterprises may overestimate here, that, this is not just a technology, it's also a behavioral shift. It's a cultural shift for a lot of organizations. And if you think about it from a SOC analyst perspective, as an example, what we're finding is that often to really get them to adopt and use some of the AI tools out there that could help them in their analysis, it takes them a decent amount of time to learn how to use the tool. These are technologists, so they can wrap their arms around that relatively quickly. Within 20 to 40 hours, a little bit of training, they're good to go. But it's about breaking the habits of using the tools and technologies they've always used. That can take months or weeks in some cases to actually start to change the way that you've worked an event or an incident, or go to the new tool and technology. So I agree. I think these will be augmentative. I think that they have a tremendous chance to help security practitioners do more of their job and do it better, especially getting rid of some of the drudgery. But at the same time, we've also got to be realistic about it and recognize that if you have a skill shortage today, introducing a technology that requires the development of skills in and of itself does not mitigate that skill shortage. It doesn't ameliorate it. If anything, it might exacerbate that challenge because now you need to teach people how to use these new tools and technologies alongside the things that you already have in place.
It's interesting. One of the conversations I had was with a person that was acting as a player coach in a SOC. So on one hand, they were the SOC team lead, but they were continually growing their org. And the most recent hire they'd made was a junior SOC analyst. And they said after a week or two of the person hitting a number of the more senior members of the team with a question here, a question there, they looked over at them and they said, "Have you companioned that?" Which Companion happens to be the name of our generative AI platform within our Trend Vision One platform for giving some guidance. By the way the story kind of fleshed out was it went from that question to the person actually going off and leveraging the generative AI and going, wow, that actually did have not only the answer to the question I was looking for, but it actually gave me the steps for remediation of things I could work on, into it. There are other points of guidance or things that you're kind of feeling are part of the short-term gains or short-term opportunities for Gen AI?
Yeah, I think short term, certainly, again, eliminating some of the drudgery, some of the toil from the SOC analysts. So things like after action summaries, report write ups, event write ups, and things like that. Awesome use case for generative AI. One, it's something you need to proofread and check out anyway. Two, it's not necessarily fun for anyone to have to write those. It can save you a lot of time. The faster you're able to do that, the more time you're spending working an event. There's also a little bit of trade-off there too, though, because learning to communicate clearly about security events is a developmental path for a SOC analyst. So the fact that we can have this content created on the fly is a good thing. It lets the analyst immerse themselves in more events and work more incidents. But we also got to think about the fact that we want them developing and honing those communication skills too, because that's important for their career. And so they'll need that capability in the future. I also think, things like automation steps or understanding the next best action for an event is also certainly interesting. And then to your point, knowledge queries, right? Identifying pre-existing knowledge, being able to ask the question of a companion, of an investigator, of an assistant of some sort, so that you don't constantly have to sort of talk to the person next to you, which when they're working events and you're working events, that's where mistakes can be made. That's where answers might be shorter or more abrupt, or you might just hit someone up on a bad day or when they're about to go to lunch or whatever it is. And so being able to have that answer that augments your team, those are really good. At the same time, you want to make sure that the provided responses are in line with your steps. So if you have an investigative methodology, then what you don't want is a set of answers that don't correspond to that investigative methodology. So you've got to make sure that those humans remain in the loop so that if the thing tells you to run 4 steps, but your process is actually 7, well, you want to make sure those 7 steps are executed, not the 4 steps, not the shortcut, because there are good reasons why you've added those extra 2 or 3 steps. And that's something that has to be tailored and customized across a lot of different enterprise organizations. And that's, again, where some of this doesn't scale as effectively as it might seem. It's a technology, and technology requires administration. It requires customization.
Yeah, I totally agree. It makes a ton of sense. And by the way, in certain vertical industry requirements, the steps are absolutely mandatory, right? It's like when we say we're going to do things step 1 through 7, you're actually out of compliance when you were to try to shortcut that. So I think your point's extremely well taken on that front. Another thing we're finding that's really exciting on the generative AI side is how there's a whole, again, this is a big data problem, big data opportunity, if you will. And imagine even things like being able to identify changes in an attack surface and where, suddenly you start seeing that there's a vulnerability or an area that proactively could be addressed. It used to be one thing just to say that you can find that. Now, what if you can actually utilize generative AI to run through attack path scenarios that even say, we're not telling you exactly what's going to happen. It's not like the Minority Report on the pre-crime unit, right? But at least it's giving you a bit of a sense that, not only do we see entry points like the entry point that's identified, but we also can see enough across a huge volume of data about what the likelihood of an attack path could or would look like from there. So I find there to be a range of really exciting new tidbits of what if scenarios. I guess I'm looking at this not just on the reactive responsive side, but maybe to help people in some of their proactive thinking.
Yeah, and I think there are real opportunities there. I think one of the biggest challenges with the proactive side, for example, the attack path modeling and things like that, is the challenge of having that environmental awareness that so many organizations struggle with. So understanding your systems, understanding their configurations, understanding their default state, understanding your visibility, you could get some interesting detail out of that. But it also means that if you don't have solid capabilities there, if you don't have solid asset management, configuration management, documentation, meaning that your environmental documentation can't be a lot of different Excel spreadsheets saved on a lot of different people's computers, which is unfortunately a very common asset management system, even in large enterprise orgs. What it means ultimately is that if generative AI does have these capabilities, if you don't have some of those basics down, you're actually kind of robbed of some of the outcomes that you could get from it. So it puts an emphasis on making sure that you have some of those standards successfully executed on, or that you bring your environment up such that you can take advantage of those things. So there are some other scenarios where even basic hygiene things that we've told people to have for a long time, maybe even things that we're dependent on IT for, as an example, that we do need to augment and enhance so that we can take advantage of some of the generative AI capabilities. Because if we've got gaps, generative AI has gaps then. And that's just true because that's how these things work.
Absolutely. And obviously we live in a continuously changing world, right? So having something that can truly continuously monitor probably is be one of the game-changing aspects of filling or addressing those gap concerns that you were bringing up. Hey, I'd love to kind of shift a bit. Everything we've been chatting about up until now has had a lot to do with how do we look at AI and what it can bring into the day in the life of a security professional. We call it, again, we think of that as AI for security. But if we turn that to the next, to flip it to the other side of it, is the adoption going on in the world of AI across enterprises. Who's utilizing various, products? I mean, I don't know if in general, I'll put out some mainstay names, right? Like there's the Microsoft Copilot adoptions, there's ChatGPT. There's a series of things that either people are implementing per seat, as well as things that are going out into the public cloud for. And there's even private projects, private LLM scenarios. So maybe we could spend a little time talking about this notion of how to bring, security for AI into the world. Curious to get some of your thoughts about what you're seeing of the demands or requirements or the state of the needs of security for AI.
Yeah, I think you divided it up pretty well there. In fact, that's usually how I divide this up. So when it comes to the conversation about securing enterprise AI adoption, and that's a conversation I have frequently, at least a couple times a day, much less a week at this point. You're right. So there's kind of the three sides, or the three ways I look at this are, first and foremost, the kind of user side, which is an employee, an end user of some variety, whether employee, contractor, or whatever, has the ability to go out to the public internet and use one of these applications, whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini or something like that. And you've got legitimate concerns about sensitive corporate information, customer information, leaking outside the organization through the use of these technologies that are not authorized. So kind of the BYO AI problem that exists. So that's kind of the surface one that you have to think about from a detection and prevention perspective. Then you've got the embedded AI tools in, frankly, all of the enterprise software you own. Because if you have an enterprise software in your business that you've subscribed to in some capacity or that you've licensed, it has AI now. And it probably has generative AI, whether it's SAP Joule, Salesforce with Einstein GPT, Microsoft with Copilot, and the dozens of other names out there that range from interesting to absurd in terms of the naming convention itself, right? Because there are some real surprises out there in terms of how folks have branded these. That's another area you have to worry about, because this changes the ways that users interact with company data. It also changes the way that we can obtain information in unauthorized fashion, right? If you've got a ERP application today, the way to get access to that data is, one, you either have to really know the ERP system well, or you have to hack it. And that usually requires knowing it pretty well and knowing a bunch of other things. Well, in the world of prompts, you just have to be able to prompt it the right way to get the information that maybe you shouldn't have access to. So there's that kind of situation of securing those technologies. And then, of course, there are the organizations that are building with LLMs, not necessarily building LLMs, but they're building applications or building with large language models and generative AI. And then you have to secure that. So you have to secure the underlying data, the application, the LLM, the prompts, et cetera, which is a whole host of other concerns with a lot of different stakeholders. So that's usually the way I divide it up, is kind of, are you solving a user problem, that BYO AI problem? Are you solving the sort of enterprise app problem? So you've got a bunch of enterprise software and now it's fundamentally changed the way it operates. Or are you trying to solve what becomes a product security problem in some cases, or an innovation problem are you worried about your data, your applications, your infrastructure, and how you're using LLMs to surface insights or be more productive within that context? So that one's the one where you're kind of building it yourself. And all of those are all part of the security stack that CISOs are responsible and accountable for, even if they're not directly charged with directing any of those projects, right?
Yeah, very fair. It's interesting. I've even heard in some client meetings where they'll share that governance and legal departments and so forth have gotten through their steps of the maturity curve of what you were just describing, are largely cranking out certain amount of directives. But what they get challenged or frustrated about in IT and security is not necessarily having all of the operationalization tooling ready to live up to that governance, right? You could come up with a guidebook, you could update the company handbook, and so on and so forth. But if the group that's responsible for ensuring the governance is living up to something, we all know we can't really IT manage or security-wise secure what we can't see. And so ensuring that there's an updated approach to the operationalization of this journey is kind of an interesting topic. One other thing I find kind of interesting that out of what you were just sharing is it almost reminds me of the early hyper-growth cloud days. And what I mean by that is it was largely a business-driven energy that went on in organizations, right? That's where the notion of shadow IT or like these various onboarding of applications and systems that weren't necessarily fully blessed by a series of company standards, that was becoming more and more commonplace. And then during that time frame, a lot of the typical enterprise security groups were looked at as the no and slow people. No offense to anyone out there in the organizations, but it was kind of what went along with it. And I think the older days of being able to enforce through governance and through security controls is harder when if you're not keeping up with the speed of the business. So I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on that. About it feels like what you've also kind of observed is that this movement that's happening does have a bit of a shadow approach to it that's taken place at times. And also it does end up getting a lot of business leadership support if folks think that their people are going to get more done faster or it's going to enter them into a market that otherwise they'd be missing. So, does this parallel seem to make sense to you the way I'm observing it?
Yeah, well, I mean, the quote is always that history doesn't rhyme, or history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And I think those are excellent lessons for us. We can learn a lot from the days of cloud, which we kind of still exist in. We can learn a lot from the days of shadow IT. And the metaphor that I often use for security leaders here is that security and IT leaders called it shadow IT. Revenue leaders and startup founders and investors called it product-led growth. Right? That's what it was. And so you've got to really think about that. Like they called this a brand new category of enterprise sales. You called it shadow IT. All they wanted to do was be able to IM each other. That's where it came from, right? All they wanted to do was be able to have a place to have tickets for features instead of tickets for case management. When you think about some of these software solutions that kind of have grown to dominate the enterprise, but started as one person adopting with a credit card because the case management system wasn't facilitating what product management leaders needed, right? So I think those are great parallels. Cloud is another great parallel. And here are some of the things that we learned from it. One, banning it, all it does is reduce our visibility because then they don't tell us about it. So banning it's the worst thing you can do. Two, that it's going to grow in fits and starts, but when the use cases emerge and they're valid and tested, adoption will skyrocket. I often say that we spent the last 3 to 4 years really trying to catch up hardcore on cloud security. Cloud turned 18 years old this year, right? Right. I mean, depending on where you are in the world, it opens up a whole set of now childhood to adulthood availability of issues that cloud could now go out and buy if it were a person, because it's been around for a couple of decades, but security didn't start really thinking about it in the way that we needed to, unless you were maybe at a startup or something else, until the last 2 to 3 years. So we had plenty of head start on cloud, but we didn't take advantage of it. So that's a big lesson here for generative AI or AI in general, is that let's not make that cloud mistake. We had 15, 16 years for cloud. We're not going to have that long for generative AI. Even if it sort of falls back and maybe all the dreams aren't materialized we have now, in 2 to 3 years, they will be. And that'll be the second go round or the third go round. And we need to be ready for it so that we're not rushing to secure it well after it's adopted. So there are a lot of good lessons, but the big ones I think about are, one, banning it doesn't work. It just drives use underground and that eliminates visibility. And two, don't be caught flat-footed the way that we were with cloud, because we had plenty of time to get ready and be better at cloud. We just didn't take advantage of it because it wasn't the most urgent issue of the day until it became the most urgent issue of the day. And so I think those are two great lessons for security leaders to take from very, very recent tech history and apply to this technology.
Yeah, I think those lessons are all spot on. And not only do I agree with you, I even think the speed of acceleration is, I think at the point in time, people thought cloud was moving awfully fast, but as you said, it's matured over an 18-year period, and we now kind of have an adult in that area. Yep. And but I believe this one on the speed of the adoption feels even faster, and so we really don't have the ability to make any of the past mistakes. We pretty much have to be ahead of, basically, as you said, learn from those lessons and be a part of the solution and interweave kind of the value to be brought to the adoption versus the notion on trying to fight it. So yeah, I think that was some great advice. Any other thoughts that you think we need to add in onto Secure for IT? Or, I mean, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I think we've covered it. One thing I will say, though, is that for those security and IT leaders in particular that want to say yes, want to enable the enterprise, but you have legitimate concerns. You mentioned this earlier around legal. I will say that security and IT leaders don't need to focus on being the Department of No for this technology. Bring in your legal team, and they'll probably be the Department of No for you. And I'm never a big fan of accountability shifting or sort of transferring that. But in the same way that we have the shared responsibility model in a lot of technologies, this is sort of the shared responsibility model inside the enterprise. And legal has a lot of legitimate questions and concerns about auditability, traceability, discoverability. And so if you are struggling with enabling the organization, but you don't want to be seen as that Department of No that security and IT have dealt with in years past, well, find a lawyer. They're there to help you, at least in this scenario, and can probably be that enforcer that you need. So, hey, it's not us, it's legal. They've got some questions that these vendors need to answer. And until they greenlight it, we're kind of stuck. And lean on them for that, because legal does have some legitimate concerns. And frankly, they have concerns because your customers are asking them about what they're doing. So I think that's one thing is, look around for your allies and realize this is a technology situation, but it's a lot bigger than that. And you've got some interested parties that might be able to help you out when you're dealing with some of these concerns.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think ensuring, that the communication and relationship is strong with your legal team and your risk org, like the overall, however governance is handled in your organization. And frankly, the other thing is to talk to the folks out there like Trend that are happy to chat with you about how to take what you learn and you agree with your legal and governance organization on how to ensure both public and private wise that you do get the visibility you need and the ability to not just ensure the folks know what is acceptable on supported standards and so forth, but how to ensure that you're not allowing for the ongoing use of things that are off standard. So there are options out there. There are ways to get that visibility and to ensure that you can enforce what those folks have put together. So yeah, definitely this is a new frontier, new times to be dealing with this. But as you said, I think we've had recent enough experience on some similar scenarios that we should be able to adapt faster than otherwise. And we can really bring security to the speed of business. We shouldn't actually have to be the no people. And as you said, we could be other parts of the org that get to be the no people.
Absolutely.
Great. I really enjoyed chatting with you, Jeff. Thank you for the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.